Good afternoon. My name is Turner Bitten. I'm the executive director here at Westview Media. I'd like to welcome you to the next event in our Candid Candidates series. Today, we're joined by Greg Skordas, a candidate for Attorney General. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you. You said my name exactly right.
Perfect. I like when I do that on the first try. Before we get started, for the folks that are watching, I'd just like to make a plug. Today's conversation depends on your questions. So if you're watching and you have questions for Greg, please feel free to submit them in the chat, and I'll be sure to ask them as we get going. But let's get started. Greg, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background? Are you from Utah? Let watchers get to know you a little bit.
Sure. So yeah, I'm from Utah. I've lived here all my life. In fact, my parents still live here. I just visited them up in Sandy. I was raised in the Murray Holiday area, attended the University of Utah and got a degree in, of all things, engineering. In fact, specifically, my degree was in metallurgical engineering, and I went to law school with the idea of being a mining and patent lawyer. Sort of shifted gears and decided to go into the criminal justice world. My wife is an attorney, Rebecca. She works for the federal court. We have 3 adult children. Nick, my oldest, is a orthopedic surgeon and a major in the United States Air Force. Daughter Annie is a teacher in Meridian, Idaho, just outside of Boise. And my baby, whose name is Bina, is an environmental scientist, sort of a sustainability engineer in Maine. So my kids are all gone, but you asked if I'm native Utah, and I've been born and raised here my whole life. My professional career started at the Salt Lake Legal Defenders Association, which is, some people call it the Public Defender's Office, representing indigents, people accused of crimes from drunk driving all the way to homicide and all points in between. Did that for several years, and then joined the Salt Lake District Attorney's Office as a prosecuting attorney for Salt Lake County. Again, started misdemeanor unit doing drunk driving offenses and worked my way up. I was actually Utah's very first gang prosecutor when we formed the Salt Lake Area Gang Project in the early 90s. That was a very exciting time. I became the chief of what was called the Special Victims Unit, which is sex crimes and crimes against children. That was a very gut-wrenching period of time. And then I became the chief deputy Salt Lake County attorney, sort of the number 2 person in the office. Left that office and started my own firm. One of the first things I did was started working with police groups. I currently represent the Utah Highway Patrol Association, Fraternal Order Police. I'm one of their attorneys. I get involved in officer-involved critical incidents. I'm the attorney for the Utah Rape Recovery Center. I do a tremendous amount of victim advocacy. But my practice is mostly, as some people know me, as criminal defense. I've really had a great opportunity practicing law and being able to travel throughout the entire state. I mean, I think I'm one of the few, maybe one of the only attorneys in Utah that's tried a case in every district court in the state. I've practiced in every county in the state, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I really love that part of it. It's been weird since the pandemic because we're not traveling around as much. We're doing court is like this. We're doing court on Zoom and WebEx, and in fact, I've got 3 computers in my office right now, 3 screens, so I can be in 3 different counties at the same time. But I miss the road. I really do, and I love this state. I mean, I love every inch of it. Just on a side note, I am an avid mountain and road biker. I race road bikes as an old man and do a ton of mountain biking. And in the winter, I'm a member of the National Ski Patrol. I currently work at Powder Mountain, where I've worked for 5 years, and I did 30 at Park City prior to that. So, you know, I try to keep a balance in my life, and the practice of law can consume you. But on the weekends, I like to jump on a bike or jump on a pair of skis and just forget about it.
Well, that sounds very familiar. And I actually learned to snowboard and ski up at Powder Mountain. And I'm not supposed to say this, but it's the best mountain in the state. So.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't know many people that go there. But yeah, it's a fascinating mountain. One of the few resorts in the West that has no snowmaking. if we don't get natural snow, we don't open. And fortunately, we still do.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So it sounds like you are running for Attorney General. It sounds like it would be a little bit of a career shift, but my next two questions, they might seem like they're a little bit out of order, but I found it's really good for the kind of conversation we're having. So first, I'd like to ask what you think is the most important role that the Attorney General plays.
So, people ask me that, and I'll maybe make a long answer sort of short, but we have city attorneys who represent the city, Salt Lake, Ogden, whatever, and the needs of the municipality. We have county attorneys who represent the needs of that organization, the county, it's, garbage, whatever we deal with, the counties handle, and prosecution. But the Attorney General represents the people of the state of Utah. It represents the entire state of Utah. We even have a United States attorney for the District of Utah that represents the federal government in its capacity. So a lot of people think the Attorney General is a prosecutor first and foremost. And of course, that's a lot of my experience. But there are a lot of things that office does with natural resources, with roads, all kinds of agencies, any state agency that needs an attorney, that needs consultation, is technically represented by the Utah Attorney General's office. A lot of states, the Attorney General is appointed by the governor. Utah's maybe not unusual, but in a group where the Attorney General is elected by the people. And although I'm not sure it should be a partisan race, it is partisan. I mean, I think it's a job that doesn't require Democrat or Republican or whatever party you're with, but it does, and that's how we're doing it. And I'm running this year. We haven't had a statewide Democrat elected in Utah since 1996. So we know that the hill is a little bit hard ahead of us, but so far it's been a very exciting ride. I've loved the campaign part of it. And the Attorney General is really the attorney for the people of the state of Utah. Thank
you. So kind of building on that a little bit, was there a moment that made you say, yes, I'm in, I'm running, or kind of what led you to make the decision to mount a statewide race? So, Turner, I've always been very interested in public service. I loved my career at the Salt Lake District Attorney's Office, but there was a moment, there was a point, and it's a weird point. I almost hate to describe it, but I got a call from an attorney, a friend of mine, a woman who called me one morning in February and said, "You've got to read the paper. You've got to read the paper." And there was an article there about the current Attorney General who took $51,000 from a fraudulent energy company, a supposedly renewable energy company. Now, you probably wonder why a renewable energy company would be donating $51,000 to an Attorney General. And they shouldn't. There's no reason. There's no legitimate ethical reason for that. But this company was a fraud. It was a scam. And they stole $500 million in tax credits from taxpayers to run their fraudulent scheme. And the only reason that company would have paid our Attorney General $51,000 is so they could continue to run that scam. And it worked. It worked as well as they could have hoped. But the United States Attorney's Office doesn't work that way. They don't take campaign contributions to look the other way. And they indicted this company, and 5 of its founders are currently in federal prison. So when I saw that article, I just thought, that office, the Utah Attorney General's office, has been for sale. And it's been for sale for 20 years. And you remember the prior 2 administrations. You may remember how badly those administrations ended by doing the same thing. And I gave the current Attorney General a chance. I really thought he was going to restore integrity to that office. I supported him 8 years ago, and I was behind him 100%. But he has taken that level of dishonesty, and I'll just say it outright, to a new level, and has taken money from people. And if you go through the campaign contributions, it's really quite disturbing. It's very, very disturbing to see what's happening in that office, and the fact that people can come in
and write the Attorney General a check ostensibly for a campaign contribution, and then expect in return that they can continue their fraudulent activities, they can continue to take advantage of Utah consumers, they can take advantage of Utah financially, just by making large campaign contributions. And so when I saw that, I thought, I can complain about it. I can continue to say how that office is for sale, or I can run, knowing as a Democrat, it was going to be an uphill battle, but I want to be on the right side of history. And I want to be able to say, I did what I could to stop that corruption. And so that's why that was the primary, the linchpin reason that I jumped into this race. It absolutely is.
Thank you. We did just get our first audience question, and I'm going to get to that in just 1 second. For those who are watching it, it may seem like we're bouncing around a little bit. And what I want to do is be responsive to the questions that are coming in live. And we'll come back to where you were at just a moment ago, but I'd like to first turn to Glenn's question. So Glenn asks, should the rioters be prosecuted? And I'm assuming what he means is the folks that have been participating in demonstrations where property has been damaged.
So, the short answer to that is yes. There's a time and a place for peaceful protest, and I absolutely am in favor of that. I wrote an article that the Tribune published right after the rioting that basically said, we had this coming because we've ignored certain communities, certain parts of our society for too long. But people who destroy property, people who burn cars, who harm others, who assault the police should be prosecuted regardless of their participation in a riot, but they should be prosecuted for that particular crime. So, I understand the protesters. My office is right across the street from where it all took place. And I wasn't sure what I was going to be walking into Monday after that. But as I watched the protesters, the ones here in Salt Lake, both at the Salt Lake Police Department and up at the state capitol, I watched the police really take a stoic role, and stand and take that abuse and do what they had to do to try to keep the peace without engaging people, without fighting, without causing problems. And so, I hope I answered the question, but people who cause damage, who destroy property should be prosecuted, notwithstanding their underlying motivation. And again, peaceful protest is what makes our country better than any other country in the world. But violent protest is something that I am not in favor of. And when that occurs, people need to be held responsible.
Thank you. We did receive another question, and I just wanted to let George that I'll be asking yours next. But as a little bit of a follow-up on the previous question, we're in what has been described as a national reckoning on race and the role of the criminal justice system. And I was just wondering, as a follow-up to your last question, if you could give us, I guess, even a 10,000-foot view, what is your view of the role of the criminal justice system and the different pieces that are being, the calls for reform that are happening right now?
Yeah, so I think some reform is in order. And we can talk about police reform, we can talk about criminal justice reform, and we could spend hours on this. Unfortunately, your viewers will want to choke me at the end of that. But let me just tell you a quick story about something that I did some time ago, talking about criminal justice reform. And I'm very, very proud of this. But, and it's been a while, it's been over 20 years. I was part of a very small group of lawyers, 3, that traveled out of state and studied what we now call drug court, and brought that drug court concept to Utah and to Utah courts. And that's been a criminal justice reform that a lot of us didn't expect. And it's been expanded to veterans courts, to mental health courts. It's been expanded to, we started in Salt Lake County, and it's now in virtually every county in the state. And it's not just adult courts, we have juvenile courts. So criminal justice reform can have a lot of hats. That's one of them. That's one of the things that I've been very proud of and that I've done and that I feel like was an innovation. I mean, I think it was coming down the pike, whether I was the lead on it or not, but we certainly got Utah in the forefront, and we're doing a great job. I mentioned earlier that I was working the gang unit back in the day, and talk about criminal justice reform. What we learned there, and this sort of ties into the rioters and some of the things that we're seeing in the country right now. What we found there was that certain parts of our community, for example, certain segments where there is a large Polynesian population or Hispanic population or Black population, respond better to officers who reflect that population. We learned that the way to get to these gang kids is by having someone who looked like them, who had been on their street, who talked like them, who understood them. And I'm not saying that we need to just sort of redo our police departments, but we've done a very good job in Utah, especially some of the larger areas, larger departments rather, of making those officers more accurately reflect the communities that they serve. And that needs to go a step further. It needs to go to the public defenders and the defense attorneys. It needs to go to the prosecuting attorneys. It needs to include probation. It needs to include parole, corrections, and judges, so that when, as I've done, tried jury trials with a Black man, my client's not the only Black person in the courtroom. Because whether you want to admit it or not, that there's some inherent bias in the way that we treat those things. And I think we do a good job in Utah. I really think we do. And I think judges work so hard to make sure that everyone is treated equally. But it's just human nature. Even though you walk into a courtroom and Lady Justice is wearing blindfold, we don't have that luxury when we're sitting in front of a person and deciding their fate. So I think we've come a long way. I don't think Utah has nearly got the problems that a lot of states do. But I still think there's a lot we can do with criminal justice reform. And I digress just a moment, but people talk about police reform or defunding the police. And of course, at least I'm not in favor of defunding the police. But I've taught around the state some classes to police and to minority groups and to civic groups on police reform and some of the things that I see is coming down the road nationally and statewide. And people are generally receptive to that. People know that we can't continue on this current status quo. We can't continue to see shootings and killings, even police officers that are the victims of that. And people, members of certain community groups can't continue to be in fear. And so I think a lot of police reform is coming down, and I think it's going to be good. I'm in favor of it, and I want to be part of that process. I really do.
Thank you. We got another question just a few moments ago from George, and I think this is a good segue to that. But he asked, Greg, what is one of your proudest cases that you have prosecuted?
Well, George, you're going to get me in trouble. You're going to get me in trouble. And I'll tell you why, because it was a very political case. And did he say prosecuted or defended?
Prosecuted.
Oh, well, then I need to shift gears because defended is a different thing. When I was the chief of the Special Victims Unit, I prosecuted a case involving a young child who had been walking home from school, and a man drove up and asked her if she could help him find his dog, and things ended poorly. She wasn't killed, but she was harmed. And I worked with her. She was just a kid, and she didn't want to testify, but we had to because this perpetrator had done a bad thing. And as a prosecutor, you always feel like you represent the people. You don't really have a client. But in some of those kind of cases, particularly that one, it was one of the very last cases I prosecuted, I felt like this kid was my client. I felt like I was serving her. And when the jury convicted, it was just such a relief. And I know she wasn't like, he needs to go to prison, because she didn't know. She didn't know what was happening. but it sort of verified what she had done, and it made her proud for standing up, proud for being brave and going to court and testifying. We have these children's justice centers now that I've been involved in since day one, and was on the board when we founded those, that allow for forensic interviews, in other words, professional interviews of children, so that they can go to court and testify honestly and freely without fear. We used to interview kids in the same interrogation rooms that we interviewed defendants, and those were not comfortable. So anyway, that was a case that really stuck with me. I haven't had any communication with her or her family since, and I would expect they wouldn't want to see me, because it remind them of a terrible time in their life. But there was a great deal of satisfaction when the jury made what I considered the right decision, and I could see her feeling some contentment.
Thank you. And I'd like to continue on the victim advocacy side of your work. We received a third question from Terry, who asked if you could explain your victim advocacy and the work that you've done on behalf of victims.
Sure. So the first thing I should say is that it's pro bono work. I don't get paid for it. It's something that I volunteer for. And I don't work for just the Rape Recovery Center, but other victim groups will refer people to me. So as the last story I talked about sort of led into this a little bit, but sometimes victims don't want to participate in the criminal justice system. And sometimes they don't know what their rights are. I mean, if they get a subpoena, do they have to come to court? Do they have to testify? And I can represent them, and I can represent to the court and to the prosecutor their feelings and their emotions. And maybe today's not a good day for this victim. Sometimes they're adults, sometimes they're children, to testify. So we're not having court today. Maybe we think the case should be resolved at a lesser crime to spare the victim testifying. And I think most importantly, letting victims speak. When an accused pleads guilty or a jury finds him guilty, we often just say the prosecutor asks for jail and the defense asks for probation and the judge makes a decision. Well, now victims speak at those proceedings when they want to. And they can opine as to what they think is a fair resolution. And sometimes having someone stand next to them at the podium, having their attorney, because the prosecution doesn't represent the victim necessarily, the defense attorney certainly doesn't, I think it gives them some strength. Additionally, Utah has crime victim reparations, which is an agency that takes money from some of the fines and fees that are assessed against criminal defendants, and can be used by victims for counseling costs, for just out-of-pocket costs, and it's been helpful because they can apply with the help of an attorney, or they can do it themselves, but it makes it easier, and just help them through that and say, look, not only am I going to be with you when you go to court, but I'm going to see that your medical bills are paid for, your out-of-pocket costs are covered. If you miss school, if you miss work, if you miss other things, that you're going to be compensated for that, and make sure that the system treats them fairly. Because a criminal case, if you read the pleadings, it's the state of Utah versus the defendant. And nowhere in there does it say the victim. So they're not technically a party to the lawsuit. They're not technically a party. And so sometimes they're sort of treated like they're just a witness. And sometimes they are just a witness, but they like to feel like they're a little more than that. So I've really enjoyed that. And sometimes it's just been people who say, I don't want to prosecute this criminal case. Are there other things I can do? Are there other avenues I can take? And I meet with them and we discuss what those can be. Sometimes it can be a civil suit. Sometimes it can be, I've represented victims in Title IX cases at 4 of our major universities, and just help them through the process of being able to testify in front of a panel against their perpetrator, against their abuser, even if their goal is just to get him or her away, get them out of the school, get them so that they understand what they did was wrong without necessarily going through the entire criminal justice process. And we do a lot of that. I've done probably 20 Title IX cases in the last 5 or 6 years.
Thank you. Um, I, I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the defense side of your work as well. So I'd like to go back to the question we had a few moments ago that said it was going to get you in trouble, but what is the best or your favorite or proudest case that you've defended on?
Again, I mean, this will be the end of my political career, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. It was about 16 years ago, the Salt Lake County mayor, the first Salt Lake County mayor, was indicted for corruption in office. She was a Republican, and she was indicted by a Democrat DA in a case that I felt shouldn't have been brought. I felt that it was a political prosecution, and it hurt me with Democrats. And that's why I hate to mention it today, because people felt that for whatever reason, and this is sort of naive, that, you know, if you're a Democrat, you don't go against Democrats. But I represented her. It was a wrongful prosecution. It was a malicious prosecution. It was a very difficult prosecution. It cost her her job. It cost her her career. It cost her her reputation. But we won that case, and a jury said, "You are not guilty of this crime." It was tremendous expense, emotional to everyone. But I was very proud of that, and I have no regrets about ever taking a case like that on, because she was a victim of what I consider to be a very poor prosecution.
Thank you. I don't see any more audience questions, so I'm going to direct us a little bit back to the ones that I have prepared. One of the roles that the Attorney General has filled that I think is a little bit misunderstood by the public is the role that the Attorney General plays in lawsuits against the federal government. This is often what makes headlines and is often in the news. And I just wanted to ask your general philosophy on these lawsuits and thoughts about the way that the current Attorney General has engaged in this process.
So I'll give you a good example. Our Attorney General is involved in a lawsuit against the administration right now that was brought for all the wrong reasons. 2 years ago, Turner, Utah voters went to the ballot box in what they call a ballot initiative, and they passed what was then called Proposition 3. This was November of 2018. Prop 3 was a voter initiative to expand Medicaid to Utah. It cost 15 cents for every $100 you spend on a color TV or something like that. 15 cents. So that 102,000 Utahns can have medical coverage that aren't covered today. The voters passed it by a majority. The Attorney General, our current Attorney General, has done nothing to enact that, notwithstanding that he represents the people of the state of Utah, and the people of the state of Utah passed this. So we didn't enact the law that the voters passed. And furthermore, and this is more direct to your question, he's part of a lawsuit against the administration brought by just a handful of really far-right AGs throughout the country, which, if successful, would have the Affordable Care Act declared unconstitutional and not exist at all, which would not only take away the coverage from the 102,000 Utahns that were trying to get into the system through this Medicaid expansion, but make a total victim pool of about 200,000 people who would no longer have insurance. Now, we're having the worst health crisis we've had in this country, at least in my short 60 years. And we have a pandemic, and we have people who are sick, and we have thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are dying and who are being infected all the time. So for our Attorney General to be part of a lawsuit, a national lawsuit that has no traction, that has no support by the people, to have the Affordable Care Act declared unconstitutional is incomprehensible. And further, for him to ignore the will of the people, the voter initiative to expand Medicaid, and say, no, we're not going to do that, is another, it's just obscene. And especially, so, I mean, if you don't like Prop 3 and you think that we need to change it, then propose an alternative. If you don't like the Affordable Care Act, and by the way, I know so many people that swear by it, but if you don't and you want to throw it out, let's at least propose an alternative. Let's at least have something in place so that we don't just have 100,000 Utahns suddenly uninsured the next day. So I think that unfortunately, our Attorney General engages in federal lawsuits when it helps him politically, and when the current administration in the White House tells him how to join and how to play a part in a federal lawsuit. Other federal lawsuits we don't get involved in, and that's because he is really at the beck and call of the current administration, and the Attorney General doesn't work for the administration, doesn't work for the White House. The Attorney General works for the people of the state of Utah. And when they pass something that says we want X, the Attorney General's job is to do that. I mean, people come to me in my office and say, hey, I'd like to get this done. And as an attorney, you don't just say, oh, you can't do that, see you later. Or, oh, if you try that, we're going to sue you. I mean, that's ridiculous. People go to an attorney to say, how can I fix this problem? And we have a problem. We have Medicaid expansion is a huge problem. The Attorney General turns his back. 2 years ago, we passed a medical cannabis law. The Attorney General has turned his back. 2 years ago, Utahns passed a redistricting commission law. The Attorney General has turned his back. We haven't moved one boundary, 1 foot in response to Utah voter initiatives. And I could just go on and on. But, you know, getting involved in federal lawsuits is fine. And we should do that. When the feds do something they shouldn't do, I support it 100%. But getting involved in federal lawsuits because the federal administration tells you how and what you're going to do is not right. And that would not continue if I was the Attorney General.
Thank you. I'm going to give you a break for just a second because I know we've asked you a bunch of questions in quick succession, and remind the audience that if you'd like to submit questions related to Greg's campaign, please feel free to do so in the chat, and we'll get to those. The next couple of questions are kind of specific to the police reform conversation that's going on, and just
Sure.
wanted to ask you a couple of questions more on the prosecutor side of the role of the Attorney General. But again, you can answer this in a 10,000 foot view. But what is your overall view of the role of prosecutors in the criminal justice system?
So I've kind of danced around this a little bit, but the prosecutor represents the people of the state of Utah, the people of Salt Lake County, whatever. And we prosecutors don't write laws. And sometimes we may not even agree with certain laws, but we're charged with enforcing them. We're charged with pursuing them. And the prosecutor's role is to be honest and to be zealous and to be an advocate, and not to prosecute for political reasons, not to prosecute because a certain person is just bad and needs to be put away, but to prosecute based on evidence, based on facts, based on a provable case that a jury can agree with and that is supported by the evidence. I mean, when I was a prosecutor, so many times police would come to me and say, Greg, this guy needs to get off the street. We need to charge him. And I'm like, with what? I mean, you know, you've got to bring me a stronger case. I can't just charge him just to take him off the street for a couple months while I lose this trial. You have to be honest with yourself as a prosecutor and say, is there a reasonable likelihood when I charge this person that I'm going to win? And I think prosecutors can go a little bit further and work with legislators on sort of tweaking laws. When I was at the Special Victims Unit at the County Attorney's Office, we were trying to find ways to bring more rights to victims. And Utah enacted during that time what we now call the Victims' Bill of Rights. So even though I said prosecutors aren't really supposed to be political activists, I think that the prosecutor can speak to the legislature and say, we need more teeth in our laws as it relates to the rights of victims, or we need harsher laws as it relates to certain type of crimes. and we're always having new crimes come in that we hadn't dealt with before. I mean, the advent of the internet, and I'm old enough to remember when it didn't happen, has brought a series of crimes, for example, child pornography crimes that we never saw before. Now we see them all the time. And prosecutors can say, look, this is a new crime. We had meth labs before that. We had different kind of crimes. I mean, I could go through 20 of them, and say, look, we need to write laws that we can use to enforce these kind of bad acts, and so that we have teeth in them. I'll tell you a goofy story, and then I'll shut up. But when I was at the gang unit, we started having people do what we now call drive-by shootings, and back then Utah didn't have a drive-by shooting law. The only law that we could find that said you can't shoot from a car was a law that was enacted to prevent hunters from shooting from their trucks. You know what I mean? So it was a very low-level crime. So we sat down with the legislature and said, okay, shooting pheasants from your pickup truck is one thing, but shooting at a house from your car is quite another. And we were able to enact laws. And that was a time when, as a prosecutor, when we sort of got more involved in the legislative end of it. But the core of the question is represent the people and be fair and make sure that justice is served. And you really, it's a hard balance for a prosecutor, because of course we always want to win our cases, but sometimes you just have to do justice. Sometimes you just have to make sure that everyone is treated fairly.
Thank you. We just got another audience question, and I want to let Glenn know that I'll get to it in just 1 second. I have two additional questions that follow up on the topic that we've been on. But one of the key points in the conversation we're having nationally is about the role of police and prosecutors, and kind of how there's an intermingling there of the two institutions. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of explain how you view that relationship between law enforcement and prosecutors.
It's another tough one, and I'll tell you why. Because as a prosecutor, you are working hand in hand with police all the time. They're your witnesses, and in some cases, like a drug case, they may be your only witness. If you have a burglary or something, you have a homeowner that can testify, or a victim crime. But in some crimes, the police officer is the one that puts the case together. The detective is the one that presents the case. But then police and prosecutors can take an adversarial role, and this is something we're seeing a lot in this country, where if a police officer is involved in what we call an officer-involved critical incident, they immediately become a suspect in a crime. And the prosecutor has to look at them and decide whether or not to charge the police officer. And that's a difficult thing. That's something I've worked on almost my entire career, both as a prosecutor and as an attorney for the police, to say, okay, this officer is doing his or her job, ended up hurting someone or killing someone. Let's look at what the facts are. Let's look at what happened here, and let's decide if it's something that should be prosecuted. But it's a tough time to be police right now. It's really a very hard time in this country. And I applaud the police. And I think Utah has just really very, very good police. And I mean that statewide. Even the rural jurisdictions have such finely well-trained police officers. But it's a tightrope you have to play with the prosecutor. And the prosecutor needs to sort of keep their distance and say, okay, in this particular case, officer, you're a witness, or this particular case, officer, you're a suspect. You used force, and I need to investigate whether that was right. We try to create these barriers, and so if some officer's involved in a shooting in, Daggett County, then maybe Uintah County might do the investigation, so that there's less of a conflict. I've been asked a little bit about the role of the Attorney General, maybe just taking over all officer-involved shootings, having that office just do them all, and avoiding any potential for conflict. And a lot of the local prosecutors don't want that. I've been trying to listen and meet with county attorneys who say, hey, we're doing just fine, and then they are by and large. But you still see incidents like we had at Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office, where an officer wasn't charged and there was just carnage. I mean, they destroyed that office just a couple of months ago.
Thank you. The last question in this kind of thread is, your general thoughts on body cameras. One of the things that I think is interesting in our society is that after an officer-involved critical incident, the calls for releasing body cam footage. And I just wondered your general thoughts on body cams and that process, the kind of public process for that type of footage.
Again, I can remember when we didn't have body cams, and I can remember, 20, 25 years ago when we didn't have dash cams. That was sort of a new innovation since I started practicing. I think that they have been very helpful to law enforcement. A lot of police officers were hesitant to have body cams and dash cams because they thought, well, what's it going to show? Well, what it shows is what the officer saw. What it does is corroborate what the officer saw, what he or she observed at the time they did something. There's a problem, and that is finances. I mean, we still have a huge number of Utah police officers who don't have body cams because their departments simply can't afford them. In some of the rural counties, when you've got what we call reserve officers who are working other jobs and work part-time, I mean, to equip all of them with dash cams in their cars and body cams on their person and all the technology is expensive. I am in favor of funding that. I'm in favor of directing funds from other areas and seeing that every police officer in Utah is equipped with a body cam and a dash cam. Now, the second part of your question is, what about the release of that? I think there's a time and a place. I know the public is sometimes anxious to see the footage of the body cam, but it's like a search warrant or an investigative subpoena or other things that we do in investigation where certain things are maintained in secret while an investigation is going on. Certain things are confidential, rather, while an investigation is going on. But once the investigation is finished, I think body cams and dash cams should be released. I mean, sometimes they're graphic and sometimes they're upsetting, but it gives the public an idea of what police are going through and what they see. And although police may not agree with me, my response is it's going to help you. At the end of the day, it's going to justify your conduct far more than you think. And when it doesn't, and the police officer did something wrong, then it's good to have that as well. It's good to have that corroboration that the officer made a mistake. Maybe they should be terminated. Maybe they should be charged criminally. But we're not doing all these dancing around with forensics and measuring things and trying to recreate things. And we put ourselves in the officer's shoes for a minute and watch those. And I've watched 100 body cam, maybe 1,000 dash cam videos, and sometimes they give you the chills, but at least you put yourself in the shoes of the officer for a minute and you can see exactly what happened.
Thank you. I'm going to move to the next question, which I thought was a very thoughtful one from Glenn. He asked that how, as Attorney General, can you promote more civility in our society?
That's a good question, Glenn, and that's a very fair question. I think that we need to, like I said earlier, have our police and our prosecutors and really the AGs reflect the community that they serve. And I think officers need to be involved in the community. I think officers who work in schools have been very helpful. I think the street officers have been helpful. I see some of the bike cops. I think that community-oriented policing, to the extent that we can expand that, is a very good thing to sort of calm the community and to keep people to where we're not afraid of police and to where police are not afraid of people of color. I mean, we've got a long way to go. I think we've come a long way, but officers can use training just as the community can to understand one another's role and one another's race and one another's person. And to the extent that we can train officers to understand that, and we can train the community to understand how difficult it is in 2020 to be a police officer, we come a long way. I've taught at the Utah Police Academies for, 30 years. And I love it. I mean, I love teaching cops. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy it. But I teach other groups too. I taught a group of sexual assault nurse examiners recently on, interviewing victims, interviewing sexual assault victims. And understanding their role in the system, and not necessarily as an advocate, understanding that working with police and working with victims. I mean, I think that the more that you understand the whole picture, the better off you are.
Thank you. I'm going to give you a break for just another second and remind folks we're ending, we're toward the final part of our interview here with Greg. So I'd invite you, if you have any last minute questions, to submit them, but I'm going to begin moving toward the final questions that I have prepared. So my next question speaks more after you're elected. So if you're elected, there's a saying that hiring is policy, that the folks that you surround yourself with are a form of public policy. So with that being said, do you agree? And what will you do to promote inclusive and diverse communities in the Attorney General's office?
Well, I mean, talk is just that. And I think you really need to come to the fore. I certainly wouldn't just get rid of people at that office. I think that office does a very good job. But when we are moving forward and when we're hiring, we need to consider the community that we represent. We need to consider the people of the state of Utah, and we need to find people who want to work at the office and want to do what they're doing. If you want to do natural resources work, that's what you should do. If you want to do appeals at the Supreme Court, that's what you should do. If you want to be a prosecutor, that's what you should do. I mean, there's so many roles in that office. And the Attorney General really needs to get the best minds and that represent the community and put them in the roles that they most comfortably can fill. You know, one thing we do, again, another thing that may get me in trouble, our Attorney General is spending thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars on outside law firms, when in fact he is the head of the biggest law firm in the state. I mean, if we can't do it internally, if we can't do it at the AG's office, we're doing something wrong. We don't need to be spending a bunch of money on outside lawyers for everything. I say that because a lot of those outside lawyers are giving a ton of money to my opponent. But I really think that you really need to keep it in-house to the extent you can. I mean, sometimes you have to hire outside, but we spend way too much money at that office, you know, fighting windmills and doing things that really we should be able to do ourselves.
Thank you. So we are in the midst of a political campaign, and I'd like to ask you what you think the single biggest issue is that you want to tackle if you're elected Attorney General.
I would say ballot initiatives and supporting the will of the people. The Affordable Care Act, the expansion of Medicaid, medical cannabis, redistricting. I think the Attorney General needs to be responsive to the people of Utah. I think the Attorney General needs to say, you're my client. Just like the people that are sitting out there in my lobby. You're the client. I serve you. I will work with you, and I will support your goals. And I'm not going to be beholden to the White House. I'm not going to be beholden to the Utah State Legislature. I'm not going to be beholden to anyone else. That's the problem we have with our current Attorney General, is that complete lack of independence. So no, I mean, I think if I was Attorney General, I would say, look, I'm the attorney for the people, and here's what the people want, and here's what's best for the people. Here's where they're leaning, and we need to support the will of the people. Even if the legislature or the administration doesn't like it, that's too bad. That's not your client.
Thank you. I did just receive another audience question, and I apologize if I slaughtered the first name, but I believe that it is Q. And they ask, if you're elected, will you be Sim Gill's boss? I asked that because that's a question they ask. Let me broaden that a little bit to ask what type of relationship the Attorney General has with county attorneys, and what your style of working with them will be.
Sure, great question, Q, very good. I would not be Sim's boss. He's the elected county attorney. Margaret Olson's the county attorney in Summit County, and we've got, James Swink up in Cache County. I know them all. And I've written them all letters. Every county attorney in the state, I wrote him a letter and said this: if I'm Attorney General, I'm not going to come into your county and tell you how to do your job. I'm not going to second guess the way you prosecute. I'm not going to come in and say, hey, we got you covered. We're going to take it over. And universally, I've had incredibly positive response from the county attorneys. Now, having said that, if a county has an issue, if you can imagine a small rural county that has a death penalty case, they may not have the resources to handle that. I can come in as Attorney General and do that. I've done those cases personally, but not necessarily that I would be the prosecutor, but I would come in and say, look, even if we're the second chair, even if we're the person helping you at that council table on that particular case, if you want us, we're there. We've got the best prosecutors in the state, and we will come in and we will help you. But we won't tell you how to do your job, and we won't take cases away from you just so we can get some more grant money or something like that. So, and I'm biased because I worked at the county level. I worked at the Salt Lake County Attorney's Office, so I support those groups. But I think that the role of the Attorney General as it relates to the counties is a support, a teaching, an aid, and when told to stay away, the Attorney General needs to stay away and let the counties do their job, unless they're doing something wrong, or unless they're doing something that just isn't something they're capable of doing. I think that independence works very well.
Thank you. So I'm going to transition to the second to last question I have for you, which is there any question I should have asked you during this interview that I haven't so far?
No, I mean, I think you did a good job. And actually, with all respect to you, I think your listeners asked some very good questions too. So, I mean, you ran a tight ship today, and I think the questions were very good. I was allowed to talk about things that I thought were important, and I think you covered it very well. I mean, obviously, I talk about myself, but nobody cares about that. They want to know about the office, and they want to know about why you're running and what you're doing, and I think you've done an outstanding job of that.
Well, thank you. So my last question for you is, how can folks contact you? What's your website, and where can they find out more information about your campaign?
So we're pretty active. Skordas, Skordas, FORAG, www.skordas4ag. We're active on Facebook. We're active on Twitter. We're traveling around the state. We're going to be in Logan and Ogden this weekend. Was in St. George last weekend. Just check us out. My name is Greg Skordas. I've been around for a very, very long time. I'm easy to find, and our campaign's pretty active, and we're statewide. We're around the whole state. So any support, even comments, even like we did today, really, Turner, it was so helpful to hear what people want to know about. I invite that all day long. And I get emails all the time from people. Well, how do you feel about, yesterday was somebody about legalizing marijuana, or how do you feel about the death penalty? And, those are very fair questions.
Yeah. And I want to just thank you for sticking your neck out and running. I know that it's probably a very interesting election season, given everything that's going on. And I just want to thank you for contributing to the civic dialogue that we're having, and wish you good luck in November.
And thank you for doing this. I mean, that's quite a public service that you do. So it was nice to meet you, by the way.
Thank you. And you take care. Thank you for your time today.
You bet.
All right. Bye-bye.